Most people do not have an investing problem. They have an order problem. And when you put money in the wrong place in the wrong order, the market does not merely fail to reward you. It punishes you quietly, repeatedly, with interest, with taxes, with stress, with lost years, with a kind of financial humiliation that looks ordinary from the outside and feels suffocating on the inside. I have watched millions of people treat wealth building like a casino menu, a little stock here, a little crypto there, a hot ETF because somebody on a phone screen told them it was smart. They call that ambition. I call it corrupted software. You do not build a fortune by collecting random assets. You build it by installing the right financial operating system in the right order. If the base layer is broken, every layer above it glitches, your investments leak, your decisions panic, your taxes drag, your debt multiplies faster than your portfolio. And then you sit there wondering why a person who has been trying for 10 years still feels one bad week away from zero. That is not bad luck. That is sequence failure. The average person thinks investing starts when you open a brokerage account. Number investing starts much earlier than that. It starts the moment you decide whether your money will serve a system or a series of urges. Those are not the same thing. An urge says, I want to feel like I am doing something. A system says, I know exactly what comes first, what comes second, what comes later, and what I refuse to touch. Until the base code is stable, the market pays systems, it humiliates urges. If you want the brutal truth, here it is. A person buying stocks while carrying 22% credit card debt is not investing. That person is performing optimism while a more powerful mathematical engine eats them alive in the background. That is like buying paint for a house whose foundation is cracked. It is like installing expensive apps on a computer infected with malware. It looks productive, it feels intelligent. It is neither. Most people want the visible layer first. They want to talk about symbols, trends, returns, upside, 10-baggers. The next big thing I want to talk about your base code, because if your internal financial operating system is written badly, every dollar that enters your life encounters friction, confusion, leakage, and self-sabotage. The money does not stay. The gains do not compound. The strategy does not survive contact with reality. And reality is where fortunes are actually built. Reality is your car breaking down. Reality is a medical bill showing up on a Tuesday. Reality is a layoff email. Reality is a roof leak, a dead transmission, a family emergency, a tax bill you forgot to plan for. A month when commissions dry up, a quarter when your bonus vanishes, a season when the economy suddenly reminds you that optimism is not cash. That is why the first thing I want installed in your system is not excitement. It is shock absorption. I would rather see you with a dull, boring, emotionally unimpressive cash buffer than with a thrilling portfolio sitting on top of fragility. People hate hearing that because the emergency fund feels slow. Of course it feels slow. So does pouring concrete. But I have never seen a skyscraper apologize for having a foundation. The emergency fund is not there to impress anybody. It is there to stop small chaos from mutating into expensive chaos. It is there so that one surprise does not force you to liquidate long-term assets at the worst possible moment. It is there so that ordinary life does not push you into high-interest debt, panic selling, or desperate financial behavior. An emergency fund is not merely cash. It is behavioral insulation. Without it, your emotions can access your investments too easily. With it, your life has a buffer between inconvenience and self-destruction. That buffer changes everything. A lot of people ask how much is enough. They want a perfect number because they are hoping a number will relieve them of judgment. It will not. A person with a government job, low fixed expenses, strong benefits, and stable health is living on one kind of code. A freelancer with volatile income, weak insurance, and no family safety net is living on another. But do not let complexity become your excuse for having nothing. Your first goal is not perfection. Your first goal is interruption resistance. Get the first 1,000, then get a month, then build to 3 months. Then if your life is less predictable than average, keep going. I do not care if that sounds boring. Boring is underrated. Boring is what keeps you from selling your future because the present sent you an invoice. People talk about returns constantly. Very few talk about survivability. I do. Because survivability is what allows returns to matter. Now, once your operating system has that first protective layer, I want you to look for the most dangerous, malicious code in the machine. That code is high-interest debt. I am not talking about debt in the abstract. I am not here to give you a theatrical lecture about how all debt is evil and you should live in a cave and pay cash for everything until the day you die. I am talking about arithmetic ambushes, debt that compounds against you so aggressively that it makes almost every normal investment return look fragile by comparison. Credit card debt is the obvious criminal. 22% interest is not an inconvenience. It is not a side issue. It is a silent predator. It is a tax on disorganization, a penalty on urgency, and a machine designed to convert your future labor into somebody else. yield, and yet I watch people carry it while shopping for stocks. That is insanity disguised as financial ambition. If a hole in your bucket is draining water at 22%, the answer is not to pour in more water and pray harder. The answer is to seal the hole. Every dollar used to eliminate that debt is producing a guaranteed return equal to the interest rate you no longer owe. People will spend 20 hours researching whether they can earn 9% in the market and ignore the 22% certainty sitting on their kitchen table. That is not an information problem, that is a discipline problem. You want to know why so many people feel like they never get ahead? Because they keep installing growth features on top of extraction code debt like that, turns effort into vapor, pay minimums on everything if you must, then direct every extra dollar toward the highest interest rate first. Not because it feels dramatic, because math does not care about your drama. The avalanche method is not emotionally glamorous, it is simply less expensive. I understand the snowball argument. Some people need momentum, some people need the small win, fine psychology matters, but never confuse motivational technique with optimal math. If you are going to choose the less efficient route for emotional reasons, at least have the honesty to say that is what you are doing. But here the operating system gets interesting, because there is one exception so powerful that it deserves to be installed even before the debt. Cleaning process is finished. Employer matching, this is where a lot of people either get confused or become self-righteous. They hear pay off debt first and turn it into a religion, then they walk right past free money because they are proud of having a rule. Rules are useful. Blind rules are expensive if your employer will match your retirement contribution up to a certain level. I want enough money going in to capture the full match. Not more yet enough. Why? Because an immediate 50% or 100% return is not an ordinary return. It is a code injection. It is a gift from the incentive structure. And one of the most important things I learned in business is that you should never ignore incentives. Systems reveal themselves through incentives. When an employer says, put in 6 and I will add 3, they are telling you that discipline is being subsidized. Your job is to take the subsidy. Take it. Then go right back to killing the high-interest debt. Do not get drunk on the existence of the match and suddenly decide this is the moment to become a full-time investor while your credit card statement is still laughing at you. Capture the match, then return to the fire. This is the difference between a clean operating system and an emotional one. A clean system knows how to handle exceptions without collapsing into chaos. That is what adult capital allocation looks like. First buffer, then stop the bleeding, then collect the free match. Now, once the emergency layer exists and the toxic debt has been neutralized or contained under the match exception, you move into a part of the operating system that very few people treat with the seriousness it deserves. Tax architecture, you can work very hard for money and still let a badly written system hand too much of it away year after year. That is what most people do. They run toward taxable investing because it feels visible and flexible. They want to watch balances move, they want access, they like the feeling of being able to touch the money. The problem is that convenience often hides drag. And tax drag over long periods is not a footnote, it is erosion. I want your operating system to compound with as little friction as possible. That means I do not start by asking, what can I buy? I ask, where should the dollar live first, so it can work with the fewest penalties. For many people, the answer after the match and after the debt cleanup is an IRA. And the reason is not mysterious. Control matters. Fees matter. Optionality matters. Many employer plans give you a narrow menu of mediocre options wrapped in layers of cost that look small in a single year and become monstrous over decades. A percentage point here, a handful of basis points there, some hidden management drag, some rigid menus, some ugly funds. Nobody would choose voluntarily if they saw a cleaner alternative. Those little costs are termites. Termites do not make headlines. They just keep eating. An IRA often gives you a wider field, lower cost funds, more rational choices, and a cleaner environment in which to let capital compound. That is why I want this layer installed properly. The point is not to feel sophisticated. The point is to stop feeding your future to unnecessary expense. If you are under 50, that annual contribution window matters. If you are over 50, the catch-up provision matters. Not because government limits are emotionally interesting, but because tax shelters are valuable code containers. You do not ignore useful containers. And then comes a question that people love, turning into a tribal argument when it should be treated as a strategic allocation decision. Traditional or Roth, pay tax now or later. Most people want this simplified into a slogan. It is not a slogan problem, it is a probability problem. Where are you in your earning arc? What is your likely tax situation later? What options do you want in retirement? How much flexibility matters to you? What kind of diversification do you want? Not in assets alone, but in tax treatment. If you are in lower earning years and expect higher income later, paying taxes now through Roth can be sensible. If you are in your peak earning years and want current deductions, traditional can make more sense. The future is uncertain. Tax law is uncertain. Your life is uncertain. That is precisely why some people benefit from using both structures and creating tax diversification inside the operating system. I have no interest in ideological purity here. I am interested in future control. The best systems do not merely optimize for one scenario. They preserve flexibility across multiple scenarios. That is real intelligence. Now we arrive at one of the most underappreciated modules in the entire machine. The HSA. I have seen many people ignore it because it sounds like an insurance side account instead of an investment weapon. That is a mistake. For the right person, it is one of the most elegant pieces of financial code available. Contributions can reduce taxable income. Growth can happen tax-free. Qualified withdrawals for medical expenses can come out tax-free in plain English. That is a triple advantage. Most people are lucky to get one. This thing can give you 3. But like every useful tool, it only works if your system can actually support it. You need the right kind of health plan. You need the cash flow discipline to avoid rating it carelessly. You need the maturity to understand that the real power is not merely in using it as a checking account for this year, as Dr. Bill. The real power is in letting it sit and compound while you pay current medical costs out of pocket if you can. Save the receipts, preserve the record, allow time to turn tax shelter into strategic force. Then years later, you have optionality. In retirement, health costs are not a hypothetical. They are one of the few expenses almost guaranteed to arrive. So why would you refuse one of the cleanest tax tools designed to meet them? People spend decades planning for vacations and almost none planning for medical drag. That is the difference between fantasy planning and adult planning. A mature operating system prepares for what is likely, not merely what is exciting. And once that module is installed, then I want you returning to the employer plan and driving contributions higher. Not first, not before the better controlled tax layers. After this is the point where the machine begins to feel powerful. The emergency layer reduces panic. The debt cleanup stops predation. The employer match harvests incentives. The IRA improves control and lowers structural drag. The HSA adds one of the most tax-efficient modules in the whole architecture. Then the larger retirement account starts absorbing bigger flows. Now you are not dabbling. Now you are engineering. That is an entirely different posture. Most people never get here. That is the uncomfortable truth. They argue about stock picks while the base system is still half installed. They chase headlines with an unfinished machine. They confuse activity with progress. And because they never complete the sequence, they never feel the compounding power of a stable architecture. A good operating system changes your behavior before it changes your balance. That is why it works. You stop improvising, you stop guessing, you stop making every money decision from scratch, you stop waking up every month and negotiating with yourself about what is important. The sequence decides, the system decides, that is freedom. People misunderstand freedom because they think freedom means maximum choice at every moment. It does not. In financial life, too much choice without structure is a tax. Real freedom often comes from pre-deciding what matters, in what order, under what conditions, and what you will not do until the earlier layers are secure. That is how intelligent people reduce error. Now, once you have filled these tax advantage containers to the degree your income allows, then and only then do I want your operating system opening the wide gate to the taxable account. This is the part people wanted to start with, and that is exactly why so many of them stay mediocre. A taxable account is flexible, that is true. It is also exposed. Dividends can create tax consequences. Gains can create tax consequences. Rebalancing can create tax consequences. Short-term behavior can create even worse tax consequences. Every time you touch it carelessly, the friction shows up. The taxable account is not bad, it is simply late stage. It belongs later because flexibility is valuable only after the core machine is already stable. Otherwise, flexibility becomes temptation. And temptation is expensive. Once you reach taxable investing with the earlier sequence already installed, now the account becomes powerful. It can fund future optionality. It can help bridge early retirement years before certain retirement accounts are accessible. It can support major purchases without wrecking the rest of the architecture. It can become part of an estate strategy. It can hold long-duration equity exposure in a way that serves your broader life design. But the account only becomes elegant when it is no longer compensating for all the things you refused to do earlier. That is the whole point. A taxable account should be an expansion layer, not a substitute for unfinished basics. Now I want to press on something harder because this is where people lie to themselves. Most financial failure does not happen because the information is unavailable. It happens because the ego hates sequence. The ego wants the advanced move before it has earned the basic one. The ego wants to feel like an investor before it has behaved like a competent operator. The ego would rather talk about upside than face the embarrassing fact that it has no emergency buffer, carries high interest debt, ignores free matching money, wastes tax shelters, and makes money decisions according to mood. The ego loves glamour, wealth loves order. Those two are frequently at war. If you are serious, you have to decide which side you are on. There is a reason I have spent my life thinking in terms of capital allocation rather than emotional theater. Every dollar has an alternative use. Every choice creates a chain of downstream effects. Every misordered decision imposes a hidden cost somewhere else. Intelligent people train themselves to see the second and third consequences, not just the first sensation. The first sensation of buying a stock is excitement. The second consequence may be that you kept your credit card debt longer. The third consequence may be that you paid interest, lost optionality, increased stress, and delayed real compounding. That is the kind of invisible stupidity that destroys decades. The same logic applies across the stack. Fail to build an emergency fund, and the next crisis forces liquidation. Ignore debt, and your returns get outpaced by your liabilities. Skip the employer match, and you reject free acceleration. Neglect the IRA, and you accept unnecessary fees and weaker control. Ignore the HSA, and you leave one of the most tax-efficient tools unused. Overfund taxable accounts too early, and you invite drag before you have exhausted protected compounding space. At each stage, the error looks small. In aggregate, it becomes a life. That is what people miss. A financial operating system is not built to win 1 year. It is built to survive decades without corrupting. And corruption rarely arrives wearing a sign. It arrives as impatience. It arrives as convenience. It arrives as boredom. It arrives as the feeling that the foundational steps are too ordinary to matter. That is exactly when they matter most. When I was younger, I learned that most extraordinary outcomes are built on a fanatic respect for ordinary disciplines. Not because ordinary disciplines are exciting, but because they create the conditions under which the exceptional can actually survive. The person who can follow the proper sequence with money is proving something deeper than thrift. That person is proving they can subordinate impulse to architecture. They can honor process before applause. They can delay visible gratification in exchange for invisible strengthening. That trait compounds. It compounds in investing. It compounds in business. It compounds in reputation. It compounds in marriage. It compounds in health. A corrupted operating system does not stay in one corner of your life. Disorder travels. So does order. Now let me make this even more practical, because I do not want this sounding like a sermon about virtue. I want it sounding like a blueprint for power. If you are at zero, your first mission is not become an investor. Your first mission is install emergency code. If you already have a small buffer, your next mission is scan for destructive interest rates and exterminate them. If your employer offers a match, capture it with discipline, not excess. If the debt is still present, return to debt destruction immediately after the match threshold is reached. If the debt is gone, begin filling the cleaner, lower-cost tax advantage containers that give your dollars better physics. If you qualify for an HSA, understand that you are looking at a weapon, not a side account. If your core sheltered accounts are not full, your taxable account should not be pretending to be the star of the show. That is the sequence. It is not exciting. It is effective. And effective is what gets you out. People like to imagine that wealth is mostly about what you buy. I think wealth is more often about what order you honor. Order is a moat, because very few people can maintain it when there is no applause attached. Everybody wants to look smart. Very few people want to do the boring thing first, then the next boring thing, then the next intelligent thing, then the next rational thing, until suddenly the compounding becomes undeniable. That is why the middle class gets trapped so often. Not because they are stupid, because the surrounding culture trains them to chase visible complexity before mastering invisible sequence. The culture says, start investing now, buy the dip, get exposure, don't miss the market, own this, trade that, diversify, speculate a little, keep it fun. The culture rarely says, first build a buffer so the market does not get to punish your bad timing. The culture rarely says, pay off the debt charging a rate higher than your likely long-term return. The culture rarely says, harvest every matching incentive. The culture rarely says, use the most protected tax containers before building outside them. The culture rarely says, stop acting like flexibility is a gift when in your hands it behaves like temptation. Culture likes stimulation. Wealth likes clean code, and clean code requires refusal. You have to refuse the seductive but disordered move. You have to refuse the feeling that sophistication means complexity. You have to refuse the ego's desire to jump ahead. You have to refuse the identity of the person who is always into investing, but never actually becomes financially durable. Durability first, then compounding, then optionality, then scale. That is how the operating system should run. I also want you to understand something subtle but essential. Following the right sequence does more than improve returns. It lowers cortisol, it reduces financial noise, it changes how you walk into work, how you handle bad news, how much nonsense you tolerate from other people. how quickly you can recover from surprises, how much you have to beg life for mercy. A person with no cash buffer, expensive debt, no system, and no tax strategy is not just financially weak. That person is psychologically easier to control. Fragility is expensive in ways that do not show up on a statement. A strong operating system buys more than money. It buys refusal power, the ability to say no, no to predatory debt, no to bad bosses, no to forced liquidations, no to panic selling, no to unnecessary taxes, no to the permanent emergency state that so many people mistake for normal adulthood. That is why I care so much about order. Order is not merely about optimization, it is about dignity. The world is full of people who earn decent money and still feel hunted. Hunted by bills, hunted by debt, hunted by uncertainty, hunted by their own financial improvisation. A clean operating system does not guarantee riches, but it dramatically improves the odds that the money you do earn actually begins serving you instead of disappearing into leakage, friction, and fear. And once the system is built, the investment decisions themselves often become simpler, not harder. You do not need to turn every month into an intellectual obstacle course. You do not need to keep reinventing your strategy. You do not need to worship complexity. You need to keep feeding the machine in the right order. That is what mature compounding looks like. Simple does not mean easy. Simple means clean, and clean is powerful. Now, some of you listening already know what the next truthful step is. The emergency fund is missing. The credit card balance is the real villain. You ignored the employer match for years. Your taxable account is bigger than your protected accounts for no good reason, except impatience. You have been reaching for visible investing because invisible repair felt too dull. Good, that discomfort is useful. Use it, do not turn away from it. The people who improve fastest are not the ones who defend their current software. They are the ones willing to admit it is corrupted and reinstall it properly. That is what this moment is. A reinstall, not of your identity, of your sequence. You do not need a new personality. You need cleaner code. And cleaner code starts with one hard question. What is the first dollar supposed to do? Not the fantasy dollar. Not the bonus dollar, not the someday dollar, the next real dollar. Does it go toward shock absorption? Does it eliminate extraction? Does it capture a match? Does it enter a tax shelter? Does it arrive too early in a taxable account? Because you still crave the feeling of investing more than the reality of building a machine. Every dollar is voting for a system. The results you get will reveal which system you actually installed. This is where most people want me to end with reassurance. I am not interested in reassurance. I am interested in truth. If your operating system is wrong, time does not rescue you. Time magnifies the mistake. If your operating system is right, time becomes your accomplice. That is the whole game, not brilliance. Not prediction, not constant excitement, sequence, architecture, clean code. So here is the final test. Look at your current financial life with no sentimentality and no performance. Strip away the language you use to flatter yourself. Strip away the excuses. Strip away the identity of being interested in investing. Strip away the hope that the market will bail out behavior the math already condemns. Then ask one question. Is my money running through a system built for freedom or through a system built for leakage? If it is leakage, stop decorating it. Rebuild it, install the buffer, kill the debt. Take the match, use the shelters. Delay the flexibility until discipline has earned it. Do the boring thing in the right order long enough, and one day you will wake up inside a machine that no longer fights you. Ignore the order and you can spend the next 20 years sounding ambitious while the software quietly eats your life. That is your choice, not someday.